They said I was just filling space. A temporary fix. A name Charles added to his life while he healed from the last one. Rachel made sure everyone at that gala believed it. Her laugh was too bright, her hug too tight, and the way she looked me up and down. You would have thought I was catering the event instead of walking in as Elizabeth Morgan, his wife. But everything shifted when David Harrington, the guest no one expected to show up, crossed the room without greeting a single soul, took my hand gently and said, "Elizabeth, you look breathtaking tonight." You should have seen Rachel's smile crack. Some moments don't just change the energy. They expose the truth everyone tried so hard to ignore. So if you've ever been underestimated, stay close. Because what happened next proved that quiet women are often the ones holding all the power. Welcome back. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. My name is Elizabeth Morgan, and depending on who you asked in that ballroom, I was either the replacement, the controversy, or the woman who didn't belong. I've heard it all, the whispers, the assumptions, the side eyes passed like appetizers on silver trays. Marrying a billionaire doesn't buy you acceptance. Especially not when his ex-wife once reigned over the social scene like royalty and sees you as nothing more than an intruder. But what they never understood was simple. I don't chase attention. I don't fight for rooms that were never built for me. And I don't explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. So when Rachel tried to parade me around like her personal punchline, smiling sweetly as she carved me up with insults wrapped in velvet, I stayed still. I stayed silent. I let her believe she was winning. Because beneath that silence, there was a truth she didn't know. A connection she couldn't imagine. A force she wasn't prepared for. And that force walked into the gala wearing a navy suit, carrying the kind of influence that made the entire room straighten their posture. Before I explain what happened the moment David Harrington said my name, you need to know how I ended up in that ballroom, standing beside a man who may never have truly seen me, facing a woman determined to erase me. Let's start at the beginning. Before the galas, the headlines, and the accusations, there was simply a conference hall in Atlanta humming with fluorescent lights and possibility. I was there to present my proposal, a community housing initiative for single mothers, and I remember gripping my note cards so tightly the edges bent. That project was my heart. My non-profit wasn't flashy, but it was real. It mattered. Charles Morgan sat in the front row that day, though I didn't know who he was until afterward. What I noticed wasn't his wealth or tailored suit, it was the way he listened. Really listened. His questions weren't about profits or publicity. They were about impact, sustainability, dignity. When he approached me afterward and asked me to dinner to talk more, I smiled politely and declined. He tried again the next morning. I declined again. I wasn't interested in becoming anyone's accessory or charity project. And I certainly wasn't dazzled by a billionaire's attention. But Charles was different then. Patient, thoughtful, genuinely invested in the work I was doing. Eventually, I let him in. Slowly. Carefully. And for a while, it felt like we were building something worthwhile. Until the world found out. The media called me a gold digger. Rachel called me worse. I stayed silent. I didn't marry a billionaire. I married a man who believed in me, or so I thought. The present snapped back into focus the moment Charles and I stepped through the ballroom doors. Light spilled from 1,000 crystals overhead, glittering across polished marble floors and swirling over the faces of donors dressed in couture and confidence. It was the kind of event people angled to be invited to, exclusive, political, expensive. And once upon a time, it had been my idea. I'd sketched the first vision for the Morgan Foundation Gala at our kitchen counter, years before anyone cared who Elizabeth Morgan was. But tonight, no one remembered that. Not until she arrived. Rachel swept in like the star of her own film, sequined gown, hair curled to perfection, smile staged and practiced. She spotted us immediately. "Elizabeth," she crooned, gliding forward as if we were lifelong friends instead of inconvenient truths in each other's histories. "Let me introduce you around." Her arm looped through mine before I could protest. "This is Elizabeth," she announced to a cluster of donors. "Charles's new wife. Isn't she just adorable?" Her tone dripped with sugar and poison. Then came the digs, quiet enough to sound polite, loud enough to sting. That color is bold. Hard to pull off with your complexion, but you make an effort. Such a simple dress. Refreshing. Oh, she's shy. Isn't that precious? I smiled. Listened. Endured. Grace isn't weakness. Sometimes it's armor. It didn't take long for Rachel's performance to escalate. The more eyes she gathered, the sharper her smile became, and the sharper her words. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me anymore. She was putting on a show. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said loudly as a group of donors approached, "that shade is brave. Colors like that must be so hard with your complexion." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Rachel didn't care. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder. "But she tries," she continued. "And her charity work, so cute. Helping little girls find confidence. Isn't that sweet? Cute. Sweet. Harmless." Words meant to shrink me down to something small enough not to threaten her place in this world. I smiled politely, meeting the donors' eyes. Some looked away quickly. Others offered sympathetic glances, trying not to get caught choosing sides. In a room built on image and alliances, defending me openly would cost them too much. And Charles, standing just a few feet away, pretended not to hear any of it. Or maybe he truly didn't want to. Either way, his silence said enough. That was the moment the doubt formed, quiet, but solid. Maybe I wasn't standing beside a partner anymore. Maybe I was standing beside a man afraid of a woman who used to own him. When Rachel drifted off to charm her next audience, I found myself alone. Surrounded by whispers. Watching. Listening. Learning. 3 years earlier, before the whispers, before the political circles and curated charity galas, there had been a conference in Geneva, one Elizabeth almost didn't attend. She was exhausted, overworked, and convinced her non-profit was moments from collapsing under its own ambition. That was the night she met David Harrington. He wasn't the type to stand out, despite being one of the most powerful billionaires in global development. No entourage. No cameras. Just a quiet man listening more than he spoke. But when Elizabeth finished her presentation, sharp, fearless, unpolished, David approached her with a look she would later learn meant he had already decided something. "You understand impact beyond numbers," he told her. "Most leaders don't." Within weeks, he became her silent investor. Within months, her unseen mentor. He reviewed her proposals, challenged her strategies, pushed her organization into rooms she had never imagined. Entering. Yet he never once stepped into the spotlight beside her. David valued privacy, Elizabeth valued peace. Their connection remained sealed, known only to the two of them. Not even Charles ever suspected the quiet force behind her meteoric rise. Back in the present, as Rachel's latest attack echoed in her mind, Elizabeth felt a slow, steady calm return. Rachel thought she could embarrass me. She had no idea whose shadow she was stepping into. The present crashed back over Elizabeth as she slipped into the crowd, hoping the music and shimmering gowns would swallow her whole. But hope was naive tonight. Everywhere she moved, whispers trailed behind her like smoke. Curious glances. Quick, quiet exchanges. People trying to pretend they weren't watching. Across the room, Rachel stood with a circle of donors. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfectly venomous. "She practically stole Charles," Rachel said lightly, as if sharing a joke. "Some people don't know boundaries." Elizabeth didn't flinch. She simply stood nearby, hands clasped, letting the silence work for her. The donors shifted, uncomfortable. A few offered Elizabeth small nods, subtle, cautious support. Even they were growing weary of Rachel's theatrics. Then Charles stepped onto the stage. Elizabeth's breath stilled. His speech flowed smoothly, praising the Foundation's new initiatives, praising Rachel's leadership, praising her vision and energy. Not a single acknowledgement of Elizabeth's role. Not one word for the woman who built the Foundation from the ground up. The applause rang hollow in her ears. It wasn't anger she felt, it was a quiet, sharp ache. Her husband was still orbiting Rachel's influence, blind to the weight she carried alone. And then, the ballroom doors opened. A new presence entered. The entire gala shifted. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the orchestra hesitated. David Harrington had entered the room. He moved with the quiet command of a man who didn't need introductions. Security shadowed him, but it was the deference, almost reverence, of the guests that made the air shift. People straightened instinctively, as if royalty had arrived. Rachel reacted first. She nearly stumbled in her rush to greet him, Charles close behind her, both wearing smiles sharpened by ambition. "Mr. Harrington." "What an honor," Rachel began. David gave them a polite, distant nod. Nothing more. His attention was already drifting elsewhere, scanning faces, searching for someone. Then his gaze found her. Elizabeth. A warmth flickered in his expression, subtle, unmistakable. Without hesitation, he walked past every outstretched hand, every eager greeting, every person desperate for even a sliver of his notice. He stopped directly in front of her. "Elizabeth, my dear." His voice softened as he took her hand. He lifted it to his lips, brushing a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "You didn't tell me you'd be here. I've missed you." Gasps ignited the room. Whispers surged. Phones discreetly lifted. Rachel's face drained to paper white. Charles stood frozen, stunned and hollow-eyed. In seconds, the entire hierarchy of the gala flipped. And Elizabeth was suddenly standing at the very center of power. Rachel's voice sliced through the stunned silence. "What is happening? Elizabeth, why is he talking to you like that?" Guests edged closer, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Charles stood rigid, confusion and something like betrayal tightening his jaw, though he had no idea what exactly had been betrayed. David remained completely composed. "If you're looking for clarity," he said evenly, "Elizabeth's proposals have informed several of my largest humanitarian initiatives over the past 3 years. She is one of the most strategic minds I've ever worked with, and one of the few I trust." A ripple spread across the ballroom. Murmurs rose like a tide. In an instant, Elizabeth was no longer the quiet woman blending into corners. She was the axis the entire room shifted around. Rachel's lips trembled as she fought for control. "So tell us, Elizabeth, were you seeing him behind Charles's back? Is that it?" The crowd tensed. Even the orchestra stalled again. Elizabeth lifted her chin, calm, steady, unshaken. "Some of us don't need to announce our worth," she said softly. "Some of us build quietly, until the world can't ignore us anymore." The words struck harder than any shout. Rachel's face collapsed into stunned humiliation, the final thread of her performance snapping in front of everyone. Charles caught up with Elizabeth in a quiet hallway, breath unsteady, eyes torn between disbelief and hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "About him. About all of this." Elizabeth met his gaze without anger. "Only truth. I married you for love, Charles," she said. "Not for your name. Not for your world. But when things became difficult, you never protected me. You let Rachel rewrite who I was." He swallowed hard, unable to argue. David stepped beside her then, not possessive, not rescuing, simply present. "Elizabeth never needed anyone to speak for her," he said calmly. "She built her success long before tonight. I only recognized it." Guests peeked from the ballroom doorway, whispers floating like sparks in the air. Rachel stood among them, shaken, her confidence drained to nothing. Elizabeth approached her, graceful and poised. "Some women need an audience," she said gently. "Some don't. But the ones without it tend to hold the real power." Rachel had no reply. None left. With the room still buzzing from the upheaval, Elizabeth turned toward the exit. David walked beside her. Charles followed, stunned and silent, witnessing a version of his wife he had never truly seen. "I walked in as the underestimated wife. I walked out as the woman the entire room would never forget. Thanks you for staying till the end. God bless, and please don't forget to subscribe because more interesting stories are up next."